Right, hello. Yeah, it's Tuesday today. It's 31st of July, and this is day two, really, of what I started yesterday. I went to Windsor. Today I'm going to try and make it down to Wraysbury, which has the Ankerwycke Yew Tree nearby, and of course the ruins of Ankerwycke Priory. Also nearby was the house of Sir Thomas Smith, who I'll try and do a bit of research on, but at one time he was the tutor to Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. So I'll see you later in Wraysbury. Yeah, so here we are in Wraysbury. That train goes off to Waterloo now. So I've got to now find my way round to Ankerwycke, which is down by the River Thames somewhere. Yeah, so I stopped off in Wraysbury village and went into an estate agent's. There was a map, and I was told you can get to Ankerwycke down the Staines Road and then down Magna Carta Lane. So quite near here, the Magna Carta was signed in 1215, apparently on an island near Runnymede in the Thames. So whether we'll get a chance to see that as well, I don't know. But now we're going to go down this lane behind me, Magna Carta Lane, in search of Ankerwycke Priory. There's the National Trust sign for Ankerwycke, and also in the background is I think a map. So let's go down and have a look at the map. Seven is the Priory ruins. 8 is the Yew Tree, I believe. So it's the River Thames, Cooper's Hill. This is the Runnymede Memorial. They call it Runnymede here, but the actual memorials are here. There. That's the Magna Carta Memorial. I think up here is the Kennedy Memorial, JFK Memorial. That's an island there. That may be where the Magna Carta was actually signed in 1215. But for now, I'm going to try and find my way to the Ankerwycke Yew and the ruins of the old Ankerwycke Priory, which is where Sir Thomas Smith, I think he lived there from 1554 when he became Provost of Eton. He was a Greek scholar. He went to Cambridge, Sir Thomas Smith, and from about 1554 he became tutor to the Earl of Oxford, Edward de Vere, who was about 4 at the time. I think for 8 years, it said, Edward de Vere lived in Thomas Smith's household. Edward de Vere was reportedly born in Essex. His father, Sir John de Vere, was known to Queen Elizabeth I, and I think she sent a christening bowl to Sir John de Vere for Edward de Vere's christening. So she seemed to take quite an interest in Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, who was very bright. And of course, Sir Thomas Smith was a Greek scholar and a scholar in many other ways. Apparently he was acquainted with John Dee and the other intellectuals around Elizabeth I. And Edward de Vere was with, well, being tutored by Sir Thomas Smith for 8 years until he was 12. And then he joined, then his father died, I think, Sir John de Vere died. And when he was 12, Edward de Vere joined the household of William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, who was Queen Elizabeth I's main advisor. So Edward de Vere became a ward of court and was further tutored in the household of Lord Burleigh, William Cecil, who had a very extensive library, just as Sir Thomas Smith did. So Edward de Vere grew up surrounded by all the texts of ancient Greece and Rome. Also, his uncle, his mother's maiden name was Marjorie Golding, and I think, if I'm right, William Golding was Marjorie's brother, and he was a translator of Ovid's Metamorphoses, which had a great influence on the writer that we call Shakespeare. And he was Edward de Vere's uncle. Anyway, that's quite a lot of background information. One thing I'll add, actually, there are some very good videos on YouTube by Alexander Waugh, who's the grandson of Evelyn Waugh, son of Auberon Waugh. And Alexander Waugh has done quite a bit of research into the Earl of Oxford, and he's convinced that the Earl of Oxford is buried in Westminster Abbey, and he's done quite a bit of work on that, starting with the clues in the Shakespeare monument, so-called, in the parish church of Stratford-upon-Avon, where Shakespeare, William Shakespeare of Stratford, is allegedly buried. And there's a monument there with some rather cryptic passages next to it. Interestingly, when Edward de Vere died, around about 1604, I think he passed away, in Hackney, in King's Place, Hackney, he was supposed to have been buried in Hackney Parish Church with an unmarked grave. I mean, this is the Great Oxford, the 17th Earl of Oxford. Why would he have an unmarked grave? Anyway, that was the story. He was buried in Hackney. But one of his relatives said a few years later that the Earl of Oxford, Edward de Vere, was actually buried in Westminster Abbey. Anyway, you can look at Alexander Waugh's videos on YouTube, which give a very detailed explanation of all that. Anyway, let's go and look for the ruins of the Priory, Ankerwycke, and the Ankerwycke Yew, of course. Right, so it says Yew Tree and Priory. Not sure about the circular route, but it looks like I'm on the right road anyway. And I think we have to go through this gate. Right, so I'm on my way to the Ankerwycke Yew. As you can see, it's a very lovely spot here in the country. And I do remember coming here about 20 years ago. So I've got some photos, it's sort of coming back to me. I remember it being very wet, and there were a lot of suspicious looking cows around. Or at least they were suspicious of me. Don't know if I'll see any today. Right, I think we're almost there. Just round the corner, I think on the left, you'll see the Ankerwycke Yew. It's the only living witness to the signing of the Magna Carta in 1215. Interesting observation. That was from the National Trust notice board. Anyway, let's have a look. I think that's it right up ahead. It's getting on for 1,000 years old. They've got seats all around it, a bit like Stonehenge. So this is the Ankerwycke Yew, the Ankerwycke Yew tree. And it is pretty big, as you can see. See, one of the things that intrigues me about this tree is that if Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, was here from the age of 4 in the household of Sir Thomas Smith some of the time, so some of the time in Ankerwycke, where Sir Thomas Smith lived when he was Provost of Eton. And apparently he had quite a big house here, built up with the stones from the old priory. Then Edward de Vere would have run all round here as a kid and would probably have climbed up and down this tree a few times. Am I letting my imagination run away with me? Probably not. If he was here, kids love trees, don't they? Let's have a look. It certainly is very mysterious. Very, very mysterious. It's very silent here under the tree. So you can imagine kids playing here, going up inside the tree, because at the time of Edward de Vere, this tree would have been about 500 years old. It's the oldest yew tree in the country. Certainly very well established. Wow. That looks like a face there, a gnarled face. I'm going to have a sit down here in a minute. I wonder where the priory is. It's supposed to be just beyond the yew tree. Oh, there's there's a bit of the priory. I'm just trying to get my bearings now, because we are very close to the banks of the Thames here, and those cars you can see in the distance are on the other side of the Thames. There's the yew tree. Let's have a look at the notice. The Ankerwycke Yew, this is an ancient tree. Please help to preserve it. The Tree Council, in celebration of the Golden Jubilee of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, has designated the Ankerwycke Yew one of 50 Great British trees in recognition of its place in the National Heritage, June 2002, the Tree Council. Well, let's go and have a look at the Priory. I still haven't quite worked out where Sir Thomas Smith's house was, because this priory was taken to pieces during the Reformation, I think, and Sir Thomas Smith took the stones to build his own house, which I think was a bit further down the river, because there's no mention of Sir Thomas Smith here. This is St Mary's Priory, which is very old. I mean, it's from before the 1500s, because it was in the 1500s that it was dismantled as a result of the Reformation. Anyway, let's go and see if we can see the Thames. Anyway, I couldn't get down to the Thames. It looks like there's barbed wire here, and I can do that another day. So I hope you've enjoyed this little visit to Ankerwycke and the Priory, St Mary's Priory. You can look it all up on the internet. The National Trust look after all this now. I'm glad I got to see the Ankerwycke Yew in more detail, because as I say, last time I was here it was very wet day, so I didn't stay long, but today has been really good. I've just discovered a house down right down by the river, Magna Carta Lane. And it's quite old. It was built in Victorian times on the island, Magna Carta Island, by a Mr. Harcourt who wanted to commemorate the Magna Carta. It was supposedly built in Victorian times, but I'm going to do more work on it because it looks to me like part of the front, the porch, or on the right at the front. It looks very old. It made of white stone. Old white stone, which looks very similar to the stone from the Priory, St Mary's Priory. So I'm wondering whether what is now Magna Carta House was built around the remains of Sir Thomas Smith's house, made in, with white stone that came from the Priory. Yes, so I'm back at Windsor and Eton Central Station. It's a lovely evening here. It's been a very interesting day. It all needs checking out, really, the connection between Edward de Vere and Sir Thomas Smith. Certainly they were known to each other for a while, but how much time Edward de Vere actually spent in and around Windsor or Ankerwycke, it's difficult to say, really, and how much tutoring Sir Thomas Smith did. He does mention Edward de Vere in a letter to Lord Burleigh, where Lord Burleigh is deeply unhappy about Edward de Vere's treatment of his daughter Anne Cecil, and Sir Thomas Smith replies, yeah, it upsets me a lot as well, and to think that I tutored him in my household as well. or words to that effect. So they weren't totally complimentary about Edward de Vere, although he did get reconciled with Anne, his wife, later on. That's another story. He had a very interesting, colourful life, Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford. He travelled in Italy a lot. He lived in Venice for about, I think, a year and a half. So he was very familiar with Italy, and it's interesting that so many of Shakespeare's plays are set in Italy. There's a very good book by Richard Roe. It doesn't mention Edward de Vere specifically, but it's called The Shakespeare Guide to Italy, and it's all about the various towns mentioned in the plays that show, the references are quite detailed, and Richard Roe goes into some detail himself in the analysis of the plays and the places. So whoever Shakespeare was, they knew quite a bit about Italy, because I think about half the plays are set in Italy. Anyway, here's my train now to go back to Slough. Right, that's it for now. Cheerio. Yeah, when I was in Wraysbury after visiting Ankerwycke, I was very kindly given this book by the vicar at St Andrew's Church. It's a history of Wraysbury by Dennis Pitt, who sadly is no longer with us. And inside is a picture of Magna Carta House. This was in 1974, this picture was taken. Magna Carta House is down at the very end of Magna Carta Lane. And if you look closely, the part on the right there does look unusually old, perhaps older than the rest of the building, which was built in Victorian times. And it's only speculation, but maybe the stones that we used there came from the priory. It's the same kind of light-coloured stone. Or maybe indeed Sir Thomas Smith's house was originally on this site. I'll have to do research on that, because I haven't found any verification of that. But the stones look very similar. Anyway, that's just an afterthought, really. All right, cheers.